Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. Are you doing the best for your client to help them create their legacy? Are you creating a plan that goes far beyond finances to help people ensure that it becomes the driving force behind all decisions? On this podcast, hosts Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller will help you with growing your practice and your clients' peace of mind. Together, they bring the best and brightest minds to share with you how to help your clients develop their best legacy. And now, here are your hosts, Katie Beth and Stan.
Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with your hosts, Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. Our guest today is a Vistage Chair, an executive coach, and the host of the Taking Care of Your Business podcast, Jeff Oak. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited to have you today.
Thank you, Katie Beth. It's my absolute pleasure.
Perfect. So before we dive in, I would love it if you would take a few minutes and tell our clients or our listeners a little bit about your background. How did you get into this industry? What sparked your passion for that? Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Thank you. I think what I'd perhaps start with is why I do what I do. And my purpose is really helping and empowering leaders to step out of their comfort zone and achieve success and significance, certainly for them, for their companies, for their organizations, and for their communities. And the way that purpose developed over the years for me is that for most of my career, 25 years, I was the chief ethics officer for very large companies. What that means is that I was the steward of the culture of large organizations. These are $3 billion, $10 billion companies in multiple states. And in that work, I was very much focused on the mission of the organization, the values that it held dear, the traditions that it wanted to maintain, and the excellence of service that they wanted to deliver. And so that itself was a very purpose-driven orientation. And in that work, I had very large teams throughout my career where most of the time I was coaching my team, mentoring my team, cultivating their skills. And while I was not a formal coach, I came to realize that what I was doing for most of my career was coaching and mentoring and developing people. And I had the good fortune to be a strong career, and the last company that I was with went through a merger activity. And when I helped with the integration and then shortly thereafter had done my work and left, I was at an inflection point. Do I go back in-house to another large company, or do I do something different? And that's when Vistage found me. Vistage looks for people who have had established careers, who have had substantial P&L responsibility, who've been in complex organizations and understand what business owners and CEOs deal with and have a desire to give back. And that I was at a stage of life where I was more focused on the giving back piece, paying it forward, as it were. So Vistage found me, and I had never heard of Vistage. And when I learned about the value proposition and what we've been doing for 70 years, I fell in love with the work. I fell in love with the history, and most of all, fell in love with the members and CEOs and owners that I'm privileged to work with.
That is awesome and a really cool story. And I know that you've said in some other interviews before that the idea of this peer advisory group, that's like a CEO's secret weapon. So tell us what you mean when you say that. How is that the CEO's secret weapon? How do our listeners utilize something like that?
And I'll go back to the history of Vistage because I think it's illustrative. We've been around for 70 years. And while a lot has changed, the basic model has not changed. And it's a rather simple one. The first person to start a group was a guy named Bob Nurse. And he noticed that the CEOs that he knew were dealing with many of the same issues. And he said, well, rather than me trying to come up with solutions for them, how about if I bring them together and harvest their insights and their wisdom so that they can help solve each other's problems? He didn't know if it would work. He brought them together. The room crackled as soon as he asked someone, okay, what issue are you dealing with? And somebody talked about a typical business issue, a non-performing executive. And that's the fundamental model, is helping CEOs step away from the day-to-day to join with peers, non-competing peers, and share perspectives and learn from each other. And in the course of that sharing of perspectives, Self-limiting beliefs are identified, opportunities are identified, blind spots are identified. And the power of the peers is, if I'm a peer of yours or if you're a peer of mine, you're not going to be afraid to say, hey, Jeff, I really think you're missing something here. I think you're making an assumption that's unwarranted. I think you're missing the point of what's going on in your business or what someone is bringing to your attention. And as a CEO, I don't get that kind of feedback because in general, employees manage their communications with the boss. And it's only peers who are non-competing have the freedom to be very direct, very honest, and very candid.
I love it. And I thank you for sharing the background on that. And I love that you did, because what's great about a good model is that you're still using it all of these decades later because it works. And it's so simple. Stan says all the time, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. When you figure out something that works, work it. So I love the entire model that Vistage has, just really allowing people to connect in a non-competitive way and work through some of these problems with people who understand and connect with those things the most, who've dealt with the same things, who've maybe done things very well, who've maybe done things that didn't work at all that you can avoid. I love the entire model that they had. Stan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, if you talk about a couple things, I know you focus on a couple things that really got my attention when I saw that these were things that were focuses of yours. The first one is trust. I want you to talk about trust as in the role of trust in leading. I guess that would really apply to leading anything, but in a business context, the role of trust in leading a business.
Thank you. Great question, Stan. Really, really, really love that question. Without trust, there is no growth. For this reason, growth requires a recognition of the need to grow and acknowledging one's need to grow, acknowledging that, hey, I don't know everything. One of my members once said in an interview, she says, everybody in my company thinks I know everything about everything. And there are some days where I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I can go to my Vistage meeting and I can say, I don't know what the heck I'm doing, and get feedback on that. Trust is built on vulnerability, and vulnerability is about acknowledging that you don't know it all and that you don't have all the answers. And Patrick Lencioni, who I'm sure very
Sure.
best-selling author many, many times over, talks about the importance of trust as the most elemental layer, the foundation of high-performing organizations. And trust is really cultivated through that vulnerability. I challenge my members, and the only way that's effective is when I've earned their trust. I can't go into the first meeting and come out guns blazing. I really have to get to know them. I really have to understand the world through their eyes. I really need to take seriously the things that they worry about, the things that they care about, the things that they're trying to fix or accomplish. And it's only when I establish that credibility and earn their trust through confidentiality and good questions and the like, that I can ask the really tough question that they will listen to. That's the critical role of trust, is providing credibility and a sense of safety in conversations. And the level of vulnerability and trust in our peer groups is incredibly high. One of my biggest surprises as a chair is how quickly trust develops among very powerful, influential people. And it's because of the exercises that we do that invite people to disclose the things that they're struggling with.
What are some of the ways that you've seen, just over the years in your experience, executives undermine trust, perhaps unintentionally, inadvertently? What are some things that leaders should be alert about, things they should be conscious in avoiding doing?
Well, I think there's a category of issues relating to power. Leaders, by their very role and their nature and their work, have a lot of power. They have a lot of power over people. They have power over the organization. They have power over systems. They have financial power. And as a leader, there are two occupational hazards you got to watch out for, hazards relating to power. On one hand, you can't allow yourself to be seduced by power, and neither can you be intimidated by it. And so the best leaders are by definition good stewards of their power. They only use it when necessary. They're prudential in the way in which they use it. So I think, and then there are a whole bunch of sub-issues, how you that issue from misconstruing power or being a poor steward of power. Then you get into not respecting people, you get into making assumptions about people, not giving them the benefit of the doubt, assuming you know everything. There's a whole bunch of stuff that flows out from power. I think another watch out is kind of in an opposite direction. It's extremely common among leaders, what we call imposter syndrome, where they don't think they're worthy, they don't think they're smart enough, they don't think they have what it takes. And that set of risks cuts in a very different direction, but it can be equally problematic, because if a leader is giving away their expertise or selling themselves short or underestimating themselves, it can really hamper them as leaders. Those are two areas. There are lots of others, but there are two areas that come to mind.
As you're saying this, I'm not sure what triggered this recollection, but I've heard that story, which I'm sure you've heard, about Roman emperors who they enter the city to celebrate, in the chariot to celebrate the victory. They make sure they have a guy in the chariot whispering in his ear, this too will pass. It's maintaining that quality of humility, even in moments of victory, right?
Yes. Humility is that's a big deal. When I'm talking with potential candidates for my group, I'm very upfront with them about the kind of qualities that I'm looking for, and humility is one of them. Leaders by nature have strong egos. They're confident. They got to be. And the very best leaders are able to manage their ego in a manner, we call it checking the ego at the door. And humility isn't about, C.S. Lewis once said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but it's really thinking about yourself less. It's not being a doormat, but it's really a proper and appropriate and objective assessment of one's importance in the world, in one's organization, et cetera. So that's something that you said that really triggered something for me as well.
Something else, Jeff, you talk about is accountability. I'm really interested to hear. I mean, I understand the concept of it, and it's obvious. I mean, it makes intuitive good sense that you want to have accountability, but I'd like to hear you drill into that a little bit and share some thoughts about, and just in the time we have, to the extent you can, let's talk about some ways that you can really do that. How do good leaders, what systems or processes do good leaders install in an organization that provide for that kind of ongoing accountability?
Another great question and really important topic, which is perhaps one of the most important dimensions of our peer group meetings, where we have a variety of ways that we hardwire accountability. I think accountability gets a bad rap. I think it's misconstrued. I had one leader, who said, well, I have a hard time with accountability because I don't like being mean. Well, accountability isn't being mean. It can certainly be applied in a mean-spirited way, but accountability is really about promise keeping. And the way we hardwire accountability is not, say, if the three of us were in a group together and I'm the chair, it's not by, Katie Beth holding you accountable, Stan, or you holding her accountable, or me holding either one of you accountable, but it's creating the conditions where people want to hold themselves accountable. So I think accountability is not something we apply to others, but we seek to cultivate from others, to my way of thinking. And I think another really important dynamic from my perspective is that there is a relationship between accountability and psychological safety. I think it's possible to apply accountability in a way that is not conducive to psychological safety, which is a constituent of trust, as I mentioned. And I think it's also possible to overdo it on the psychological safety side and hold back from really holding people accountable. And I think the best leaders correlate those two things, holding people accountable while creating a climate of psychological safety. That is, in my estimation, in my own experience, the strongest forms of accountability is ones that bring together the psychological safety component as well.
There's just one of the thing you talked about that really grabbed me, and that is that you've really recognized and understand the power and the value of squeezing, I would say, squeezing the value out of failure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that we do on a regular basis in our meetings is we talk about successes and we also talk about failures. And even when there are successes, for example, I had a good quarter financially. I might ask, is that because of decisions you made, or is that in spite of decisions you made? And so I think good results are much more than whatever outcome it happens to be. Although good outcomes are good, I'm not disparaging them, but the why and the how behind them. And the same goes for failures and learning from them. And I don't know how many members I've had who have said that the darkest moments of their business careers, and some of those have been, situations that they've experienced while they were in Vistage, external events, market shifts, what have you, were really the result of failures. And if we think about our own lives, what have been the most consequential and transformative learnings that we've made? More often than not, it's when things didn't go our way.
It's so common though for people to beat themselves up about the failure and not squeeze the DNA material out of it in a way that propels them forward.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Right. Or by not really acknowledging the failure at all. We've talked to clients before, and one of the hardest things I feel like to get people to really take a moment to really acknowledge kind of where they are and where they are starting from, kind of moving towards some of these things. And I know that you've talked about before that all leaders have blind spots. What is your strategy for that? How do you help leaders figure out what they need to be working on?
Yeah, and you've touched on, Katie Beth, the really critical element of why blind spots are hard, because we're blind to them. We can't, by their nature, we cannot see them ourselves. I had one candidate who's a member, actually, when I was interviewing him, he said, I really don't think I can get any value from this because I'm pretty strong on pretty much all the leadership capabilities. I'm good. I have a lot of success. I know what I'm doing. I said, okay, well, let's just stop the interview. And he said, well, actually, no, let's continue with the interview. So we did the interview. And then I said, well, since you're not going to join, I'm going to ask you a hypothetical question. If you did join at our first meeting, when you introduced yourself, talked about your failures, your successes, what have you, what blind spots do you think the group would discover in you that you can't see yourself? And there was a very long pause. But I think that's one of the signature gifts of a peer group. We don't see our own blind spots, but we can see the blind spots and limitations of others. And that's the only way we discover our blind spots. It's not through a brilliant test, although self-assessments can be helpful. It's not just through a singular interaction with an executive coach, although that can be helpful too. But it's a pattern of relationship and a pattern of interactions where peers whom you respect and trust make observations that you never thought of, or ask questions that you've never been asked, or point out assumptions that you've never seen. And when that happens, magic happens because we are seeing ourselves through the eyes of others. That's the only way we can reliably get a sense of our blind spots. And it's continuous work. I mean, it's not the case that once we discover what our blind spot is, that, okay, I'm good, I know what it is. No, blind spots are very sneaky. They're very gremlin. And the lesser angels of our nature tell us that we're good, that we got a handle on things. But it's really those better angels, sometimes in the form of a peer, who says, I know that you probably haven't thought about this, but I'd like to share something with you that might be hard for you to hear. And that's where the trust comes in, the vulnerability. And I sometimes tell my members that the truth will set you free, but usually it'll make you miserable first. And that's the way blind spots work. Once we understand them, it helps set us free or set us on a path to freedom. But boy, is it miserable at the beginning.
Yeah, I would imagine, blind spot's such a great analogy for it because it really is like a blind spot in a car. What's in your blind spot is always changing.
Yes.
As a leader, your blind spot, as you continue to grow, maybe you identify that first blind spot or those first blind spots, and you're actively doing things to work on those. And then you're never done. There's always, once you start tackling that, what your blind spot is changes. Maybe you start as a person who has imposter syndrome as a leader and you undersell yourself and you're not sharing your skills and all of your gifts to your ability. And then eventually you get pretty good at that. And then maybe you become that leader who is a little bit too confident. And maybe that becomes, I can see how the need for constant assessment is always happening because the needs of leaders and the growth of leaders are always changing. So I love that kind of within your program, there's just a sort of a freedom and an acknowledgement that is the case, that we all have a blind spot, no matter if we've been in the program for 2 months or 10 years, there's probably still something we need to be working on. And there are peers to help us with that. I love that model. I would imagine it's maybe a little harsh sometimes. No one likes to be told, right, the things they're not good at, but a very necessary evil to become a better leader.
Yeah, I love the way you framed it, that we're always working on it, right? That work never ends. And yeah, the work never ends. The work never ends. So
that is most certainly true. Well, before we run out of time, I did want to take just a minute to kind of touch on the podcast that you have. So tell our listeners a little bit about Taking Care of Your Business, the podcast. Where can they find it? What can they expect from the podcast?
Thank you, Katie Beth. You can find it on LinkedIn by just putting in Taking Care of Your Business, or Facebook or Instagram, all of the social media, Spotify, all of the social media. I do a variety of things. I interview Vistage speakers who are some of the top experts in their respective fields. I interview my own members and other business leaders about their business, what they've learned, what they do, what's distinctive about their organizations. And then I do brief, well, I call them snippets. They are practical, simple, and actionable insights for leaders and small business owners. I lean on, quote, without attribution, some of the lessons that my members not only have learned, but what I have learned from them. And it's a sharing of what I've learned and what might be helpful to others to learn as well.
That's great. I love that. And one final question. So through the work that you do as an executive coach, the podcast that you have, all of this good that you're out there doing, what is it that you hope your impact on the world will be, or that your legacy will be?
I love that question. I hope that my legacy is empowering the people that I interact with to reach their highest potential in every domain, their highest potential in terms of their values, their own purpose, their own aspirations for themselves, for their companies, for their families. And to the extent that I can help them achieve that potential is what I hope to do. When I recruit CEOs for my peer group, At the first meeting, a human being shows up, not a CEO, a human being. Surprise. And then the real work begins. And for me, that work is empowering them to move beyond what's familiar so that they can achieve both success and significance, however they define that.
I love that. A great way to wrap up. So thank you guys for listening to the Legacy Leaders podcast with your hosts, Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. Our guest today was Jeff Oak. And to connect with Jeff, you can find him at jeffoak.com, and you can also connect with him on LinkedIn. We will link both of those for you in the show notes. You can also find the Taking Care of Your Business podcast anywhere you normally get your podcasts. Jeff, thank you so much for jumping on and sharing your wisdom with us today. We really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. I'm very grateful.
You've been listening to the Legacy Leaders podcast with Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller. For more information on them and the show, please visit pinnaclelegacylaw.com. If you like what you've learned today, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.